She was born beneath a blood moon, and the pack decided her scars were a curse before her first breath left her body. The village of Northmere sprawled across a frozen valley where ice clung to every stone and the wind carried the memory of old wars. Kale had lived 23 winters in the shadows of those mountains, hidden in the cellars and forgotten corners, wearing the shame of her own existence like a second skin. Her right arm bore the marks, burned scars that twisted from shoulder to wrist, a pattern like frozen flames. The healers said it was a sign of rejection from the goddess herself. The elders whispered that she was born wrong, that her mother's bloodline was cursed, that no alpha would ever bond with her because no alpha should have to carry such a burden. She believed them. Everyone did. On the morning of the autumn choosing, the ritual where young omegas were presented to potential mates, Kale stood outside the great hall, her body wrapped in white furs that she'd sewn herself, her scarred arm hidden beneath layers of cloth. Her heart moved like a caged bird, frantic and desperate. This was her last chance. After this season, she would be considered passed over, a term the pack used for omegas no one wanted. The great hall doors were carved from ancient oak, adorned with the silver sigils of the goddess, circles and crescents, eternal and unforgiving. Inside, the alphas waited. Inside, her fate would be decided. She took one step forward. An elder, Magda, with her frost-white hair and eyes like winter itself, stepped between her and the threshold. No. The word fell like an axe. Kyle's breath caught. Elder, your arm, Magda said, her gaze fixed on the hidden scar. Everyone knows what it means. The goddess does not bless the broken. You will not shame this ceremony by entering it. But the law says every omega. The law says every worthy omega. You are not worthy, child. Your mother knew it. Your father knew it. And now, so do you. The cold was nothing compared to what moved through Kale's chest. Around them, other young omegas watched from a distance, their unmarked skin glowing in the morning light. Not a single one stepped forward to defend her. Why would they? Her rejection made their value higher. Magda's voice softened, and that was somehow worse. Leave Northmere. Go north, beyond the Wolf's Teeth Mountains. The settlements there don't know our bloodlines. Perhaps you can find a human to take pity on you. But you will not remain here. We cannot afford to carry curses. The word curse echoed in the stone hall like a prophecy. By sunset, Kyle had gathered what little she owned, a water flask, a knife, and a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon that her mother had given her before she died. Her mother, who had always said, "Your scars are not shame, little one. They are proof that fire tried to consume you and failed." Kale had never believed her. She walked out of Northmere as the first snow began to fall, her scarred arm now bare, visible to anyone who cared to see it. No one followed her. No one called her back. The pack had made its choice, and she had made hers. Disappear or learn to survive in the spaces where no one cared about bloodlines and curses. The mountains swallowed her whole. 3 days into the frozen wilderness, Kale found shelter in a cave carved into black stone, where the wind moved like something alive and the shadows held their own kind of warmth. She had built a fire, small, careful, the kind that didn't draw attention, and was rationing her last strip of dried meat when she heard it. The sound of something massive crashing through the snow. Her hand went to her knife. In the wild, predators came in many forms: wolves, bears, hunters from rival packs. She held her breath and waited. What stumbled through the cave entrance was not what she expected. He was enormous, easily 7 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the moonlight. His fur was deep silver, almost white in places, and matted with blood that had turned brown and crusted. He was in human form now, his body scarred and battle-worn, his left side torn open where something, or someone, had clawed through muscle and sinew. His face was angular and beautiful in a way that suggested old nobility, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds. He collapsed before he saw her. Kyle's instinct screamed at her to run. An injured alpha was unpredictable, dangerous. He could wake and strike her down without thought, and no one would ever know. But something else moved in her, something deeper than fear. She recognized the look on his face. It was the same expression she saw in the mirror, the look of someone the world had decided to discard. She moved toward him. His breathing was shallow, ragged. The wound on his side was infected, the flesh around it darkening with poison. Fever had painted his skin with sweat despite the cold. He was dying, and slowly. Kale worked without thinking. She used snow to clean the wound, her scarred fingers steady despite their trembling. She found herbs in her pack, moonflower and winterbell, plants the healers had taught her before they'd decided she was cursed, and made a poultice. She bound his side with cloth torn from her own cloak. Her voice whispering words her mother had taught her, the old tongue of the goddess that no one spoke anymore. "Hold on," she breathed. "Just hold on." He woke near midnight, his hand moving toward her throat in pure instinct, before his fever-hazed eyes registered that she was not a threat, that she was, in fact, the reason he was still breathing. "Who?" His voice was gravel and rust. "Someone who didn't leave," Kyle said quietly, stepping back to give him space. "You came into my shelter. You were dying." His gray eyes searched her face, confused. Then they dropped to her scarred arm, visible now in the firelight. Something shifted in his expression, not pity, not horror. Recognition. "You're marked," he said. "So are you." She gestured to the wound she'd bound. "But for different reasons, I think." He tried to sit up and failed, his body too weak. A sound escaped him, half growl, half laugh. "What's your name?" "Kyle." "Kale." He repeated it like it meant something. "I'm Ronan, king of the northern reaches." He paused, as if waiting for fear or deference. When neither came, something in his expression softened. "They call me the Mercy Killer. I executed my own brother for crimes against the pack. My counsel says it was justice. My heart says it was murder. Either way, I'm no longer welcome in my own kingdom. They sent their best hunters after me. One of them caught me 3 days ago." Kale understood then. He wasn't injured because he was weak. He was injured because he'd been betrayed. "The goddess doesn't make mistakes," she said quietly, and she wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. "Your scar isn't a curse. It's a choice you made." Ronan's storm-gray eyes met hers, and for the first time in either of their lives, neither one looked away. "Why did you help me?" he asked. Kyle thought of Magda's voice, of the great hall doors that had never opened for her, of the weight of a curse that had never been hers to carry. "Because I know what it's like when no one else will." Outside, the wind howled against the mountains, and the moon, blood-red and ancient, rose over the frozen peaks. In the cave, 2 broken things sat by a fire and found in each other's silence the first whisper of something that might have been hope. Ronan's fever broke on the 7th day. His strength returned slowly, first the ability to sit upright, then to stand, then to walk the perimeter of the cave as if he could pace away the ghosts that haunted him. Kale watched him move, noting the way pain still flickered across his face with every step, the way his hand returned again and again to the scar on his side, as if checking that it was real. "Tell me about Northmere," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. The question came without preamble, but Kale had learned that Ronan spoke in this way, direct, unguarded, as though he'd learned long ago that there was no point in wasting time with pretense. She told him everything, the rejection, the choosing, Magda's words like ice in her chest. She even showed him her arm fully for the first time, unwrapping the cloth and letting the scars catch the firelight. They looked like frozen flames, like the prints of a fury that had tried to consume her and failed. Ronan's response was to take her scarred arm gently in his hands and trace the pattern with one finger. My mother used to say that the old goddess, the one before the priests changed her stories, rewarded the ones who survived fire, he said quietly. Not because they were lucky, but because they were strong enough to choose survival over comfort. Your mother sounds wise, Kale said. She was. His jaw tightened. She was also a healer. She used to treat the weakest members of the pack without judgment, the sick, the old, the ones everyone else had given up on. She said that's what separated us from animals, the choice to care for those who couldn't care for themselves. He paused. My brother said she was wasting resources on the useless. When she refused to stop, he poisoned her tea. Kale's breath caught. And you? Killed him. Yes, in front of the entire council. They called it justice at first. They called it the king's mercy because I didn't let him suffer. Ronan's hand tightened around her scarred wrist, not painfully, but with desperation. But my council realized quickly that my mother's way, mercy without condition, was a threat to their power. So they reframed it. Suddenly it wasn't justice. It was weakness, emotional governance from an alpha king who wasn't fit to rule. They sent hunters. They declared me a traitor. So you ran. So I became what they accused me of being. His gray eyes found hers. A king without a kingdom is just a wound that won't close. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The cave had become their world, small, contained, safe in a way the larger world never would be. Kale had rationed their food carefully, and Ronan had used his strength to hunt, his wolf form moving through the white landscape with lethal grace. They had built a kind of life in the frozen dark, but Kale could feel the shift happening inside her. Something was awakening. It started with heat at the base of her spine, the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It intensified when Ronan was near, when his storm-gray eyes caught the light, when his hand brushed against hers as they passed water back and forth. She recognized it, had heard the older Omegas whisper about it in corners they thought she couldn't hear. The call, the pull toward an alpha, the instinct that existed beneath conscious thought. But this was different. This wasn't the mindless attraction that the elders had warned her about. This was recognition. One night, as they lay on opposite sides of the fire, Kale couldn't contain it anymore. "I'm in heat," she said bluntly, because there was no point in dancing around it. "I can feel it. The scent changes will start tomorrow." Ronan's entire body went rigid. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I'll leave. I'll hunt further out, give you space." "No." The word came out stronger than she felt. "I don't want you to leave." "Kale, you don't understand. When an Omega is in heat, an Alpha's instinct is to bond." She finished the word for him. "I know. That's what I'm asking." Ronan sat up, his scarred side catching the firelight. "You're asking me to mate you out of isolation and gratitude. That's not—" "I'm not asking you to do anything," Kyle said, her scarred arm raised now, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm telling you what I want. I'm telling you that no pack would have me. No alpha would have chosen me. But you're here, and I see you, all of you. The mercy, the guilt, the strength that everyone else calls weakness. And I choose you. Not because I have to, not because instinct demands it, because I want to." The fire crackled between them. Ronan moved slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to reconsider. He crossed the space between them and knelt before her, a king on his knees before a girl the world had discarded. His hand came up to touch the scar on her arm, tracing it like a prayer. "If I bond with you," he said quietly, "I'm claiming you. Everyone will know you're mine. The councils, the hunters, the packs. They'll come for both of us." "Let them come," Kyle said. "At least I won't face it alone." He kissed her then, and it was like fire finding its match. like the universe recognizing itself in two halves that had been fractured. His hands moved through her hair, down her back, and Kale felt the heat inside her rise like moonlight, silver and inevitable. When he shifted beneath her, careful, so careful with that wounded side, and entered her, it wasn't possession, it was homecoming. Later, as they lay tangled together, Ronan's forehead pressed against hers, something passed between them that was older than words, a bond that the goddess had woven in blood and choice and defiance. "We need to tell you something," Kyle whispered into the darkness, and her voice carried a note of certainty that hadn't been there before. "The people watching this story from their homes in the dark, wherever they are in the world, at whatever hour the night finds them, they need to know that this is where two broken things learned they could become whole. If you're listening from a city where no one sees you, or a room where you feel invisible, leave a comment and tell us where you are and what time your clock reads. Tell us that you understand what it means to be rejected and to choose yourself anyway. Because the Moonblood Chronicles exist for those who know that redemption isn't a reward, it's a revolution." Outside, the blood moon hung low over the mountains, and somewhere in the distance, wolves howled their ancient songs. In the cave, two souls who had been deemed unworthy lay breathing as one, and the night held them like a secret the world would never understand. 40 days after the bonding, Kyle woke to find her hands glowing. Not softly, not gradually. It was like waking fire beneath her skin, silver light that pulsed from her scarred arm and spread across her palms in patterns that matched the burns that had marked her since birth. The light moved like liquid mercury, like moonlight made tangible, and when she touched the stone wall of the cave, the rock beneath her fingers bloomed with crystalline formations, ice that never melted, ice that held the shape of flowers. Ronan was awake instantly, his hand on his knife before he understood what he was seeing. "What is this?" His voice was wonder and fear tangled together. "I don't know," Kyle whispered. She watched as the light spread further, consuming her entire arm, and instead of pain, she felt only rightness, like something inside her that had been broken was finally being remade. The healers never said anything about this." "Because they didn't know." Ronan's voice carried certainty. "This is old magic, Kyle. This is the magic of the goddess before the priests rewrote her stories. This is what your mother must have had." Kyle looked at him sharply. "How could you possibly—" "Because I've seen it once before." He took her glowing hand in his, and where their skin met, the light intensified, spreading across his fingers like silver fire. "My mother had it. The healers called it the Pathfinder's gift, the ability to sense the fractures in living things and mend them, to see where pain lives and draw it out. They said it was a curse because it made her too weak to be ruthless, too inclined to save lives that the council deemed expendable." The light pulsed between them, and Kale understood, not through words, but through the bond that connected their blood and bone and essence. She understood that her scars weren't a curse, they were a mark. They were the signature of the Pathfinder, the one born to heal what others had broken. "My whole life, they told me I was wrong," Kale said, watching the light dance across her skin. "They said my arm was a sign of rejection from the goddess. They lied." Ronan's voice was steel. "They lied because they were afraid. A Pathfinder sees the cracks in the world, in systems, in hierarchies, in the lies that keep people in power. Of course they feared you. You were born to expose them." "What am I supposed to do with this?" Kyle asked, and her voice cracked. "I can't even control it." "You will." Ronan lifted her glowing hand to his heart, pressing it against his chest where his heartbeat moved strong and steady. "You already are. You healed me. Not with knowledge or training, with choice and compassion and will. That's what a Pathfinder does." Kyle closed her eyes and felt the gift flowing through her like a river, responding to his heartbeat, to his need. She could sense the poison still lingering in the wound at his side, old infection, deep and stubborn. She focused on it, imagined drawing it out like water from a well, and the light in her hands surged. Ronan gasped, his body arching. But he didn't pull away. He trusted her. And that trust was the key that unlocked everything. When she opened her eyes, his wound was healed. Not scarred over, actually mended, the tissue repaired, the infection burned away. Where the claw marks had been, there was now only smooth silver skin, marked with lines that looked like moonlight frozen in flesh. "It's beautiful," Ronan whispered. "It's terrifying," Kale corrected. But she was trembling, from the exertion, from the power still flowing through her, from the realization that she was not cursed. She was awakened. That night, as they lay entwined by the fire, Ronan told her the rest of the story his mother had whispered to him as a child. "The Pathfinders are rare," he said, his voice low and almost reverent. "Maybe one is born in a generation. The goddess sends them to balance the world, to remind people that strength without mercy is just brutality. The old councils understood this. They protected the Pathfinders, honored them. But as time went on, the new priests began to rewrite the stories. They said mercy was weakness. They said the Pathfinders were aberrations, mistakes in the bloodline. They started hunting them, burning them." Kyle's hand tightened around his. "Did they catch my mother before she could teach me everything?" "Yes." His jaw clenched. "She died when I was 16. I've spent 7 years trying to figure out if I had any of her gift, or if I was just a broken alpha trying to honor a woman they murdered. But now I think—" He turned to face her fully, storm-gray eyes intense in the firelight. "Now I think the goddess sent you to me, not as a mate, as a revelation." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your gift isn't just about healing physical wounds, Kale. It's about healing the fractures in the world. It's about showing people that there's another way. A way that doesn't require violence, doesn't demand hierarchy, doesn't crush the ones who don't fit the mold." He paused, his hand moving across her scarred arm with reverence. "My brother broke my mother's heart by poisoning her. The council broke my kingdom by declaring mercy a weakness. They sent hunters to kill me. They're probably still hunting." "So what do we do?" Kyle asked. Ronan's smile was dangerous and beautiful. "We don't run anymore. We prepare. We let them come. And when they do, they'll see a Pathfinder heal what they tried to destroy. They'll see a king who chose compassion over cruelty. And they'll have to decide, do they execute us, or do they finally admit that the old ways, the merciful ways, were right all along?" Outside, the storm that had been brewing for weeks finally broke. Snow fell in sheets so thick they couldn't see beyond the cave entrance. Inside, 2 souls glowed silver in the darkness, and the light from Kale's hands painted the ancient stone walls with patterns that looked like prophecy, like the map of a world being remade by those strong enough to believe in it. They came in the spring, when the snow began to melt and the paths through the mountains became passable again. Kyle sensed them first, felt the disturbance in the air like a wound opening in the fabric of the world. 20 hunters, maybe more, moving through the high passes with purpose and malice. They were led by a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes like flint. Kyle recognized her from the stories Ronan had told. Vera, the captain of the Northern Guard, the woman who had been Ronan's right hand before his brother's death, had split the kingdom apart. "They're here," Kyle said quietly. Ronan was already moving, pulling on his furs, his hand settling on the sword at his hip. Not as a weapon, but as a statement. "Then we meet them. We don't hide anymore." They walked out of the cave together as the sun climbed toward midday, silver light hitting the snow so brightly it hurt to look at. Ronan stood with his scarred side visible, his massive frame casting a shadow across the white landscape. Beside him, Kale stood smaller, but somehow just as vast, her scarred arm glowing faintly in the daylight. the light under her skin like a heartbeat made visible. Vera and her hunters emerged from the tree line like wolves closing in on prey. The captain studied them with an expression that shifted between shock and something that might have been sorrow. "Ronan," Vera said, and her voice carried weight. "You look well for a dead man. We received reports that you'd succumbed to your wounds 3 moons ago." "I was dying," Ronan acknowledged. "Someone saved me." His gaze moved to Kale, and Vera's eyes followed. Her entire body went rigid. "An Omega," the captain breathed. "You bonded with an Omega. The Council will—" "The Council will what?" Ronan's voice was still calm, but steel ran beneath it. "They already declared me a traitor. They already sent you to kill me. What's one more reason for them to rage?" "It's not about rage," Vera said, and something raw crossed her face. "It's about the law. You know what happens to Omegas who bond with Alphas without Council approval. You know the punishment." Kale stepped forward, her glowing arm raised. The light intensified, spreading across the snow in patterns that looked like flowering vines. Where it touched the frozen ground, ice bloomed into impossible shapes, roses and stars and geometric patterns that seemed to contain entire universes. "I am Kale of Northmere," she said, and her voice carried a resonance that hadn't been there before, like it was coming from the earth itself. "I was rejected by my pack for bearing scars they didn't understand. I was marked as cursed, deemed unworthy." She paused, her glowing hand moving toward Vera. "But I am a pathfinder, and I can see the fractures in you, in all of you." Vera stumbled backward, but Kale didn't touch her. She didn't need to. The captain's eyes were wide, fixed on Kale's glowing form, and understanding was dawning across her face like sunrise. "Ronan's mother," Vera whispered. "She was—" "A pathfinder," Kale confirmed. "And you knew it. You knew what she was, and you let the Council hunt her anyway." Vera's face crumpled. She sank to her knees in the snow, and the hunters behind her stood frozen, uncertain. "I was following orders," Vera said, her voice breaking. "She was kind to me once, when I was a girl and dying of fever. She healed me without asking for anything. And when the Council said she had to be stopped, She looked up at Ronan, at Kale, and her eyes held the weight of 7 years of guilt. "I chose power over mercy. I chose the Council over the woman who saved my life." "And now?" Ronan asked, his voice gentle. Vera stood slowly, her hand moving away from her sword. "Now I see what it cost me. Now I understand what we lost when we let them kill her." "The Council sent you to execute me," Ronan said, "to bring back proof of my death. What will you tell them?" Vera looked at her hunters. One by one they lowered their weapons. The captain turned back to face Ronan, and her expression had transformed, not into obedience, but into something that looked almost like the beginning of redemption. "I will tell them the truth," Vera said. "I will tell them that the king has found his queen, that she is a pathfinder, and that her light is stronger than all the darkness we've been building for generations. I will tell them that I choose mercy." She knelt before Ronan and Kale, her hunters following suit, until 20 people were prostrate in the snow before the scarred Alpha King and the girl the world had rejected. "Rise," Kyle said, and when she spoke, flowers bloomed in the snow around them, ice flowers that would never melt, that would serve as a monument to the moment the world began to change. "Rise and help us rebuild what was broken." That night, as they sat by the fire in the cave for the last time, Vera told them the full scope of what they were facing. The Council had declared martial law. They'd locked down the northern passages. They'd convinced 3 neighboring packs that Ronan was a threat, a king who had betrayed his own blood for a pathfinder, a man who wanted to overturn the natural order by elevating an Omega to power. "They're building an army," Vera said quietly. They mean to execute you both and use it as justification to purge the remaining Pathfinders from the bloodlines. They've already arrested 3 healers they suspect of having the gift. They're burning the old texts, the ones that speak of mercy as strength. Kyle felt the fire move through her, but it wasn't rage. It was purpose, crystalline and clear. Her glowing hands clenched into fists, and where her fingers pressed against her palms, light erupted like silver flowers blooming in fast motion. "Then we don't hide," she said. "We go to them. We let them see what they've been fighting against. Let them see that a Pathfinder isn't a weakness to be exploited. It's a revolution." Ronan took her glowing hand in his. "You understand that this might kill us." "I understand that we're already dead if we don't," Kale replied. "We're dead if we run. We're dead if we hide. But if we stand, if we show them what happens when mercy meets power, maybe we don't die. Maybe we live." Outside, the snow had stopped falling. Spring was coming to the mountains, and in the cave, 2 souls who had been deemed unworthy began to plan the only thing that might save them, not a battle, but a revelation. The gates of Northmere were closed, barricaded with iron and guarded by wolves in human form, their expressions hard as stone. Kyle stood before them, with her scarred arm glowing in the pale dawn light, Ronan at her side, and Vera behind them with a dozen hunters who had chosen mercy over orders. "Open the gates!" Ronan called out, his voice carrying the weight of command. "I am your king, and I have returned to reclaim my throne." The guards exchanged glances. One of them, a young man with a scar across his left eye, stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Majesty," he said, and the title sounded strange in his mouth, like something half forgotten. "The council says you're no longer king. They've crowned Aldrich as your successor. They said you were compromised by—" He stopped, unable to voice the accusation. "An Omega?" Kyle finished for him, stepping forward. Her light intensified, spreading across the stone gates in patterns that made the guards step back in fear and wonder. "An Omega who is also a Pathfinder. An Omega your council was always taught to fear because she represents something they cannot control, the possibility that power might look different than they expected." "She's cursed," another guard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No." A new voice called from behind the gates. The captain of the inner guard, a woman named Mira, who had been Kale's only kindness in the years before her exile, stepped into view. "She's blessed." Mira opened the gates herself, her face fixed with determination. Behind her, other guards followed suit, until the pathway into Northmere stood open. They walked through the village like ghosts returning to haunt the living. Kyle saw the faces she'd known all her life, the elders who'd rejected her, the Omegas who'd watched her exile with barely concealed relief, the Alphas who'd never even deigned to acknowledge her existence. And they all watched her now, watched the light flowing from her scarred arm like liquid silver, watched her walk beside a king who moved with the grace of someone who had nothing left to lose. The great hall was packed. The council sat in a semicircle, their robes dyed deep red, the color of blood and judgment. And before them stood a man Kale had never seen. Aldrich, with his perfect unmarked face and the arrogance of someone who had never been questioned. Magda stepped forward from the council, her frost-white hair catching the light from the great windows. "Kyle," the elder said, and her voice was a blade. "You returned tainted, bonded without consent, bearing the light of a curse we thought we'd exorcised from our bloodlines." "I return," Kyle said, her voice steady, "bearing the light of what you tried to kill, bearing the gift of the Pathfinder that your council has hunted and murdered for 7 generations." The hall erupted. Guards moved toward her, but Vera's hunters blocked their path. The council members stood, shouting denials and accusations. Aldrich reached for a sword that hung on the wall behind the throne, and Ronan knelt. The entire hall went silent. The king of the northern reaches, marked by his own guilt, scarred by his own choices, knelt on the stone floor before the woman the world had rejected. "I kneel before my queen," he said, his voice ringing out through the great hall. "I kneel before a pathfinder, before a healer, before a woman strong enough to survive what would have destroyed anyone else. And I ask, what will you do? Will you execute us both? Or will you finally see that the law as written is unjust?" Kale moved forward, her glowing hand extended toward Magda. The elder flinched, but Kale didn't touch her. She turned to the other guards, the other council members, the Omegas and Alphas watching from the shadows. "I won't heal the one who rejected me," Kale said quietly. "That's not my power. My power is to reveal what's broken, to show you the fractures in your hearts that you've been hiding for generations. I can show you that the Pathfinder bloodline was never meant to be eradicated. I can show you that the ones you called weak were always the strongest. I can show you what happens when you choose mercy over malice." She raised her scarred arm fully, and the light from her hand spread across the stone walls of the great hall, illuminating every corner, leaving nowhere to hide. In that light, the council members saw themselves clearly, saw the fear that had driven them to cruelty, saw the smallness of their ambitions, saw the way they'd built their power on the suffering of others. Some of them fell to their knees, others turned away, unable to face what the light revealed. Aldrich lunged forward with his sword, but Vera caught his wrist. The hunter woman twisted the weapon away with brutal efficiency and held it toward the floor. "Choose," Vera said simply, "mercy or execution. We're giving you that choice, the one no one ever gave us." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the great hall was fixed on Aldrich, waiting to see if he would choose the old way or the new. His sword fell from nerveless fingers. "I choose mercy," he said, his voice hollow. "I choose to step down. I choose to believe that maybe you're right." Ronan stood and moved to Kale, taking her glowing hand in his. The light that blazed where they touched was so bright that everyone in the hall had to shield their eyes. When they could see again, a crown had materialized on Kyle's head, ancient silver marked with crescents and circles, the crown of the old goddess, the one that had been lost when the new priests had rewritten the stories. "I believe mercy can crown even the fallen," Vera called out, and her voice was a prayer. "Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth," Kale whispered, and the words carried on the light itself, spreading beyond the hall, beyond the village, into the world beyond. She was speaking to everyone, watching from their dark rooms, from their lonely places, from their spaces of invisibility. Because everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to be chosen, even the ones the world called cursed. Outside the great hall, the spring sun broke through the clouds, and it fell on Northmere like a blessing, like a new beginning illuminated by the light of something that had been hunted, rejected, and had survived anyway. 3 moons passed, and Kale found herself standing in a room that had once been a war chamber, now transformed into something else entirely, a sanctuary for the pathfinders that the old councils had tried to destroy. Word had spread, faster than Ronan's hunters could track, through networks of healers and outcasts and the desperate ones who'd always known there was another way. They came from the broken packs, the scattered villages, the places where the old order still held people in chains. 17 pathfinders arrived at Northmere, each bearing marks that had been deemed curses, scars, unusual hair, eyes that saw too much, hands that glowed with the silver light of mercy. Kyle trained them, though she was still learning herself. She taught them to feel the fractures in the world, to see where pain lived in people's hearts, to draw out poison without causing further wound. She taught them that their gift wasn't weakness. It was revolution in its purest form. Ronan built something different, a council not of soldiers and judges, but of healers and artists and philosophers. Men and women who understood that strength could wear many faces, that a kingdom could be ruled by compassion. That power meant nothing if it didn't serve the people it was meant to protect. Vera became the Queen's Guard, and under her leadership, the Hunters of the North transformed from an army of executioners into protectors, of pathfinders, of the weak, of the vulnerable ones the old councils would have discarded. But not everyone accepted the change. The southern pacts remained hostile. 3 councils banded together, declaring Ronan a heretic and his kingdom a threat to the natural order. They sent spies to Northmere, saboteurs who tried to poison the wells and burn the healing sanctuaries. One night, an assassin slipped past the guards and reached Ronan's chambers, a knife meant for his heart. Kale healed the wound that the guard's desperate intervention had caused, her hands glowing as she drew the poison from his blood. But as she worked, she felt something else, a deeper fracture, not in his body, but in the structure of the world itself. "They're going to try to destroy us," she said quietly, when Ronan was stable and whole again. "Not all at once, but slowly. They'll break our supply lines, turn neighboring pacts against us, create fear and doubt until even our own people begin to question whether mercy was worth the cost." Ronan took her glowing hand in his. "What do you want to do?" Kyle looked out the window toward the mountains, where she'd first found him dying in the snow. She thought of Magda's voice, of the great hall doors that had been closed to her, of every moment she'd been told she was wrong for existing. "I want to show them that we're not going to hide," she said. "I want to leave Northmere. I want to go to the other pacts, the ones who are still suffering under the old councils, and I want to show them that there's another way. I want to make it impossible for them to deny that the Pathfinders are necessary." "That's suicide," Vera said flatly. She'd entered without knocking, as was her habit now. "You walk into enemy territory, you're likely to walk out in pieces." "Maybe," Kyle agreed. "But if we stay hidden, if we only hold Northmere, they'll eventually gather enough forces to overwhelm us. Our only chance is to spread, to make the change so pervasive that they can't eradicate it without admitting they were wrong all along." Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and moved to the chamber door, calling out for Mira. When the captain arrived, he gave her orders to begin organizing supplies for a journey, not as refugees, but as emissaries of a new order. "We leave at dawn," he told Kale. "You, me, Vera, and every Pathfinder who's willing to risk their life to show the world what you are." That night, Kale climbed to the highest tower of Northmere and looked out across the frozen landscape. The moon hung low and red, and for a moment she could swear she heard her mother's voice on the wind. "Your scars are not shame, little one. They are proof that fire tried to consume you and failed." She understood now. The fire had tried to consume her. The pack had tried to erase her. The councils had tried to murder everything she represented. And she was still here, still burning with silver light, still choosing mercy when the world demanded cruelty. "Come," Ronan said, joining her on the tower. He wrapped his scarred arms around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. "We have a long journey ahead." "Do you think we'll survive it?" Kyle asked. Ronan was quiet for a moment. "I think we'll be reborn by it. And maybe that's the same thing." 5 years later, the northern reaches were unrecognizable. The councils that had once ruled through fear were replaced by circles of healers and philosophers. The Pathfinders were honored, their gifts celebrated rather than hunted. The southern pacts, one by one, came to see that Ronan's way worked, that communities built on compassion healed faster than those held together by violence, that mercy cost less in the long run than perpetual warfare. There were still those who resisted. There always would be. But they were fewer now, and their voices had lost the power to condemn. Kale sat on a throne that faced east instead of north, an intentional choice, a rejection of the old hierarchies. She wore the crown of the old goddess, but more than that, she wore her scars like regalia. Her scarred arm rested on the armrest, and the light it emitted had become so part of her that people no longer flinched from it. It had become familiar, normal, beautiful in the way that only things that have survived are beautiful. Ronan stood beside her, not above, not below, but at her side. His scar from that first wound was now a band of silver across his ribs, and it glowed faintly when he moved, a mark of his transformation from a broken alpha to a king who had chosen compassion. They received the delegation from the eastern reaches with ceremony and warmth. The alpha leading them, a woman named Sienna with her own scarred face, knelt and offered her pack's allegiance, asking only that Kale send pathfinders to their villages to begin the work of healing what the old order had damaged. After the ceremony, Kyle sat in the library, the one place in the castle where she found true peace. Vera found her there, as she often did, reading through the old texts that scholars had been recovering for years. "There's something you should know," Vera said, settling into a chair across from Kyle. "The hunters have discovered evidence of a new threat. There's a faction forming in the Deep South, old councils, old believers in the pure hierarchy. They're calling themselves the executioners of the goddess. They claim that what you're doing is a perversion of the divine will." Kale looked up from the text she'd been reading. She could have been afraid. The girl who'd been exiled from Northmere would have been terrified. But the queen who sat before Vera now was something different. She was still that girl. Her scars proved it, but she was also transformed. "Send emissaries," Kale said quietly. "Not soldiers, healers. Send them with pathfinders who can show them what mercy looks like. And if the executioners choose violence, let the world see what they choose violence over. Let them see that they're choosing to destroy healing itself." Vera smiled, truly smiled, a thing the guard captain had learned to do only in recent years. "You're not the frightened girl anymore." "I'm exactly the frightened girl," Kale corrected gently. "But now my fear doesn't have power over me. It's just something I carry, like my scars." That night, Kyle dreamed of the cave where she and Ronan had first bonded. She walked through it in the dream, feeling the weight of the earth around her, seeing the fire that had kept them alive reflected in eyes that now held all of her future. When she woke, Ronan was already awake, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "I had a dream," he said, "about my mother. She was standing in the great hall, and she was proud. She said—" He paused, searching for words. "She said that the world had needed to break a lot of things before it could learn to love the broken ones." Kyle reached for his hand, and where they touched, the light glowed. It was softer now, less like fire and more like breathing, a natural part of her that required no explanation or defense. "There are people watching this story unfold," she said, and her voice carried the same tone it always did at these moments, like she was speaking across impossible distances, reaching toward every soul that had ever been told they were wrong for existing. People in cities and villages and quiet rooms watching at the exact hour when their world feels smallest. To them, I want to say, your heart beat alongside ours. Your recognition of the broken and the redeemed, it kept the flame of redemption alive. Like, comment and subscribe, not to hear us, but to tell yourselves that you too can be reborn from the ashes of what was meant to destroy you. Outside the castle, the moon rose over a kingdom that had been healed by compassion, where Omegas walked freely and pathfinders were honored, where Alpha Kings knelt before the ones the world had rejected. It was not a perfect place. Perfection was not something the Moonblood Chronicles had ever promised. It was a place where imperfect people had chosen, again and again, to believe in mercy. The blood-red moon illuminated the snow-covered peaks, and somewhere in the mountains, new pathfinders were learning that their scars were not curses, but callings. Somewhere in the valleys, hunters were laying down their weapons and learning to be healers. Somewhere in the dark places, the ones who had always been told they were wrong were finally learning that they were, and had always been, Exactly right. Kale held Ronan's hand as the light from their joined palms flooded through the castle, through the kingdom, spreading like a prophecy through every shadow that remained. And in the darkness of 1,000 rooms, 1,000 hearts recognized themselves in that light. They had survived the fire. They had become the flame. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.